have no fear, we will have fulsome controversies to talk about. Today we're not gonna make it past the table of contents. Just want to do kind of a brief overview of each of the documents contained in the Book of Concord. As I think about it, I was preparing a new member class, and I thought, well, this is kind of the record of what our church teaches. And as a Lutheran, I think that's kind of the most important thing about a church, and every church body feels that way, and that's okay. So I thought it would be wise to go through and say, hey, what's in this dang thing? So we'll start at the very start, and I'll try to give you kind of a... did I already give you one of these? Did we already do this before? Is this how we started?
This is mine. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I didn't get it from you, but I don't know if that's what you
I knew I'd
wanted.
printed one up before, but I think it was at an old congregation. I lost a computer, and now I got to do everything
Came
again.
across that
What a
maybe
shame.
several years ago.
Um,
You want it?
nah.
You probably wrote it.
Imagine if I look in there and I go, oh, I didn't know about that. Right. That wouldn't be too good. So we'll start at the very beginning of the book here. So you, of course, have the preface, which we actually did do at the beginning of our study. And then this collection begins with the ecumenical creeds. You're familiar with these, the Apostles, the Nicene, and the Athanasian Creed. The Apostles' Creed, of course, is ancient, no one knows quite how old, baptismal creed, but you can kind of see fragments of it as early as kind of middle 2nd century until it comes to its fullest form around the 4th century, perhaps before, but that's, you're familiar with this, you confess it every week. The Nicene Creed, similarly, this one's got a little bit, in fact, quite a bit more settled prominence. Comes out of the councils of Nicaea in 325. You kind of get the first 2 articles, and then it just ends, and the Holy Spirit. Wasn't much, they only had so much time, they didn't have time for the Holy Spirit stuff. In the intervening about 50 years, they said, hey, we better polish that off and fill out the Holy Spirit stuff. So by 381, we have it in the form we see today. Again, you're well familiar with that. And then the Athanasian Creed, written by... No, of course not. Named in honor of Athanasius, who was this prominent...
That's why they named it Athanasius.
Right.
That was an interest, okay.
It's kind of his doctrine,
Yes.
right? So you remember Arius, kind of the church's first arch heretic. He denied the eternal divinity of the Son. Athanasius said, nope, God of God from before all times. And so he puts together, it actually wouldn't be that much in error to say that he writes these things, but the final form does come later. So he's kind of the great defender of orthodoxy there. This is the great big long creed that we say in this church once a year on Trinity Sunday. Some churches do it quarterly, which I think is cool. I stumbled into one. I was visiting Josie.
Like it.
I don't think it's that bad.
No, I really did.
It's kind of, gets its point across, and it's not that confusing. It's just long. But I stumbled into it, and this is Grace Lutheran up in Muncie, and I show up, and they're confessing the Athanasian Creed, and it's like September. I'm like, okay, cool, but I didn't expect that. I'll be late to brunch. So this actually takes its form a little bit more anonymously. We don't quite know who comes out with it. 4th, 5th century, so a little bit later than Athanasius, but clearly you don't do a lot of Trinitarian theology without consulting the big guy, St. Athanasius.
Somewhere I read that the Athanasian Creed kind of reflects the theology of St. Augustine.
Some have said that as well.
It
Yeah.
is not used in the Eastern Orthodox Church.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's not fully ecumenical.
Not fully
I don't think
ecumenical.
Eastern Orthodox churches use the Apostles' Creed that much either, if at all. The Athanasian Creed is the one that is truly the ecumenical creed.
The Nicene, you mean?
I mean, the Nicene
Yes.
Creed, right?
You're right. In some ecumenical talks, they have, I think, formally accepted the Apostles' Creed, but they said this is kind of a Western creed. This is just not part of our heritage, so it's not, doesn't play a big part. But they're willing to say, as some Baptists are, not all, but some, this is faithful. It's just not historically used in our service. Now, of course, what's really of interest of these is why do these show up in a particularly Lutheran book of confessions? And the answer is not too hard to figure out. The statement being made here is, well, we are the church of the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed and the Athanasian Creed, and we're just continuing to do what the church was doing then. We're continuing to make a good confession. This one's a bit more lengthy. More issues have been uncovered since then. But this is the claim. We're not making a sharp break. My confirmands do this all the time. It drives me crazy. I've got one who's asked me 7 times, why did Martin Luther break from the one holy Christian church? And I go, oh my gosh. But parents don't like when you say your kid needs to be in confirmation for the next 10 years.
They kicked him out. He did a great thing.
Well, that's what I tried to tell him. But then the 5th or 6th time, I just go, man, I don't know. I don't know why he did that. That's crazy. Oh well, you keep trying. But this is the claim being made, is that we're not saying anything new. We're maybe saying things more clearly than they needed to be said in the past. Just as, the apostles probably weren't talking a lot about Trinitarian theology. It just kind of hadn't come up yet. They're baptizing in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, right? Just told you to do that. But they really hadn't kind of worked out all the details in painstaking detail as would later become necessary when such things were challenged. So those are the creeds. You're familiar with those. Another couple works you're familiar with, the Augsburg Confession and its apology, right? So you remember the story. Well, here there's great dissension in the empire, and in fact, we'll rehearse the story a little bit because we'll kind of move it forward through the years where we don't have a lot of documents. Nothing in the 1540s, 50s, or 60s, which is not to say nothing happened in the Reformation. These are pretty formative years. So you remember Emperor Charles V, a staunch and devout Roman Catholic. He hears about all this mess going on in Germany, and he says, all right, Germans, what's going on? What's the deal? What are you teaching? And they go, well, we'll tell you what we're teaching, and this is the Augsburg Confession. And it's signed off by princes and city councils and other various nobility. This is 1530. And you remember the political situation, why Charles is so adamant that this kind of gets solved, gets settled. The Holy Roman Empire is huge at this time. In fact, too big, kind of ungovernably big. And so he's got the Turks besieging Vienna on his east. He's always fighting with France on his west. And so he really needs the support of the Germans. And he says, well, we can't really have a divided kingdom as far as religion. If we're going to fight and die together, we had better be united in faith as well, which is not a very American way to look at things, but it's not American. And so this is kind of his attempt to smooth things out, get everyone back together. I don't have very warm and rosy feelings toward this guy. It looks like he wasn't really working that hard. He wasn't really that interested in conciliation and agreement. He kind of responds. He accepts the confession, and he hands it off to John Eck, who was a perennial opponent of Luther himself. And he writes the confutation and says, all right, here's where you're wrong, here's where you're wrong, here's where you're wrong. Pretty much every article that wasn't, kind of the Trinity and those sorts of things. And the emperor goes, all right, here you go. Here's the truth. And you guys just need to deal with it, right? Again, he's not really working that hard he's really trying to strong arm the Lutherans into kind of just reverting. And he'll get there, but a little bit later. And so you'll remember, and this is kind of a matter of some interest, Luther, as you well know, having read through the thing, not the author of the Augsburg Confession, because he was kind of a persona non grata in the emperor's eyes. He's an outlaw, right? And so he can't show up at imperial diets because they'll arrest him and kill him, which would be, this tends to be a bad move in your professional career, getting arrested and killed. Not for everyone, but Luther thought that would be the case. And so this gets handed off to a young man called Philip Melanchthon. You've got his picture there. Not a very good-looking guy, or maybe he didn't pay his portrait artist enough. Melanchthon was a younger guy and a bit more, what would we say about him, bookish. It was said, and I'm not sure if this is true or not, it was said that at the university he would do stand-up comedy in ancient Greek. He's kind of a Greek scholar. These are kind of things that are kind of amusing at the university, right?
That's a nerd.
Yeah, he was a giant dork, which is the kind of guy you want drafting doctrinal statements, right? But of course, a lot more, you'd say, ironic than Luther, right? Luther was kind of, Luther had kidney stones, and Luther had gout, and that kind of is Luther's personality. He was a little bit more of a firebrand, and he was a little bit more forceful. And of course, this is the kind of personality that really gets people going, whether we think it's the kind we want our children to have or not. And so Luther is kind of the face of the Reformation. We kind of see it that way historically and retrospectively, but it's quite true. But it was wise to have Philip draft this. Very bright guy, brilliant scholar, and of course not ordained, very interesting, and not by trade a theologian, right? Now, of course, in the university, everyone's a theologian. Nowadays, I don't think my university even has a theology department, which is okay. He was by trade a rhetorician, right? So he taught how to write arguments and win them. And in fact, he seemed to be quite good at this, and his textbook was the kind of standard text for centuries to follow. But this will become kind of a problem as we go forward in the history of the Reformation, is that Philip was also interested in reconciliation. And so you notice this when you go back and forth between the confession and the apologies we have. In the confession itself, he's kind of a little bit more easy to get along with, right? He doesn't make his case quite as forcefully. He doesn't say, "Oh, you idiots," right? He doesn't do that kind of thing. You see it a little bit more in the apology, but throughout his life and his career, he continues to be kind of he's interested in unity, which is good because the scriptures are interested in unity as well. He's not a sinner for this, but that'll be notable as we go on here. So the apology, you remember, is a response to the confutation. This one's a little bit less of a legal document, right? It's more of kind of a theological treatise. So the confession itself lives in the realm of law and kind of imperial diplomacy. So it's a bit more diplomatic. That's the word I've been looking for. The apology is a little bit more rhetorical, and academics talk to each other in a different way than maybe they talk to their lawyer.
So he was a lawyer?
No, not by trade, but he kind of...
theologian, but what? So what was...
He's a professor by kind of profession and trade.
Okay.
But you imagine that rhetoric is a pretty important thing in both theology and law, and so he kind of bumps shoulders with these guys. There aren't a lot of people who go to school to be a rhetoric. Well, in fact, they're called salesmen. But of course, in medieval Germany, the guys he's teaching tend to be pursuing careers in law or theology, and so you can kind of see how he works in both realms. The apology is also his work as well, although never in isolation, right? And so the whole stable of Wittenberg theologians who kind of contribute to these work, and they're writing their own works, and Melanchthon goes, "Oh, that sounds good. I'd like to use that kind of phrasing here," and they go, "Okay, yeah, here's how it." And so it's somewhat of a group effort, but he is kind of the final editor and drafter, and his work there.
Somewhat like the role of Thomas Jefferson in writing the Declaration.
That's just what I was thinking, right? He didn't come up and go, "Hey guys, check what I wrote."
No.
But he was the principal
It was a
drafter,
collaborative effort. He is the principal.
certainly the head. So the Confession 1530, the Apology 1531, and then we go back in time a little bit to two different documents, and these are probably the ones you're most familiar with, Luther's small and large catechisms. I won't spend too much time on the history of these. I hope you know it. So in the midst of the Reformation, is in some ways kind of a pastoral Reformation, right? Not so much theology, although that's kind of the impression you get from reading theology books. But they go out and they visit these churches, and they see that there are a bunch of Christians who don't know the Lord's Prayer. They don't know the Creed. They don't know the Ten Commandments. And so this goes, "Oh, we got to do something about this." And for that reason, he produces the small catechism, something you can kind of paste to the wall and rehearse every day as kind of a memorization for your children. And this is why we make our confirmands memorize it. Now, of course, that doesn't work because we're 10 years too late, but I can't go back in time and fix that. But this is the point of the small catechism, is for parents in the home to teach their kids so that you might defensively call them Christians, right? You met someone who didn't know the Lord's Prayer, you might say, I don't know. That's kind of a tough, doesn't know the creed. You might go, in what sense are you Christian, right? You don't know anything about the faith. It is, in that way, difficult to call you Christian. So the small catechism is aimed towards that. But in that same visitation, he finds something not surprising, but even more damning, is the clergy doesn't know these things and certainly can't teach them. They've all ended up in these roles for much different reasons. And so he produces the large catechism, which is not a particularly difficult work if you've spent any time with it. It's actually, I think, a lot more straightforward than the small catechism. Much larger, not some fit for memorization. But Luther kind of spells it all out. He goes, all right, the fifth commandment, here's what this looks like. Here's examples of what this looks like. If you're teaching people what this is, just use these examples. It's kind of a quick and dirty lesson plan for teaching the faith, kind of more on the clergy side of things. And so those books are much less, you see how they come from a very different place than the Augsburg Confession does. They're not out to assail any bad theology in particular. They're really more of a pastoral and devotional tool for teaching the faith to young Christians.
I understand they originated primarily as sermons.
Yeah, this is the story of the large catechism, is that these were kind of catechetical sermons that Luther put to text. I'm not sure the truth of that, but it certainly seems. They seem to be that way.
Yeah, Taffert's
is that what
edition says
Tappert
the immediate
claims?
background material consists of sermons which Luther preached in May, September, December 1528,
Okay.
and March 1529. So at least that was
Okay.
his preparation for
Yeah.
writing it. Whether or not the sermons went directly into it, that was.
Oh, I believe Tappert on that. But yeah, this is the old story, is that these are kind of what you might hear from the pulpit about the first, second, third, fourth commandment, about this part of the Lord's Prayer.
Very quotable.
Yeah, and this is the point, in a way that, say, the formula of Concord is a little bit more inside baseball, right? Which is okay. Both serve their purpose, but the purposes are quite different, and I think that's worth recognizing. And then as we go on from there, the story gets a lot blurrier and more interesting. The next documents we're going to come to are the small called articles and the treatise on the power and the primacy of the Pope. So after the time of the Diets of Augsburg, things kind of get sorted out for Charles. The French on his western flank kind of quiet down. He's still kind of tussling with them, but less openly. And the Turks, well, you've heard the story. They're besieging Vienna, and God sends rain, and their cannons get stuck in the mud, and Europe is saved. Which gives Charles some time to look into domestic matters, which are almost entirely the Reformation. And so things kind of flare back up here, and with peace on the west and peace on the east, he looks north towards the German lands, which are kind of the heartland of the Holy Roman Empire. And he says, all right, it's time to really get this Lutheran problem under control. So he ends up mounting war against his own people, kind of trying to put down the rebels, right? That kind of idea. And the Lutheran lands, kind of interestingly, on paper, you would say, really should have been able to withstand this assault, right? And they would have if not for one problem. You remember the elector Frederick. This is Luther's kind of prince, pays Luther's salary, these sorts of things, and he's kind of a staunch defender of the Reformation. I forget when he dies. It's somewhere in here. But he has a son also who takes his name, who is himself also perhaps an even stauncher Lutheran, and he really believes this stuff, right? He's not in it just to pay fewer taxes to Rome or something. Some guys are. He's not, pretty clearly. But the problem with Frederick is you understand how these kind of dynasties work is one guy has a bunch of kids, but only one kid can be in charge. And this kind of perpetuates itself through time. And Frederick is, at some times, the most powerful man in the empire, even more powerful than the emperor, right? It's happened sometimes. So his title is pretty well sought after. And he's got a little cousin whose parents did not inherit the great big title of Elector of Saxony and ruler of this great big territory. His name is Moritz, and he's a little hurt by this. He kind of would like to be running the show, and Charles, because he's a smooth operator, says, "Hey, you want to be Elector of Saxony? We can make that happen. All you got to do is turn on your family and kind of defect and get this war settled." And Morris goes, "Oh, okay." He's a little bit less of he doesn't care too much about theology. I mean, it's just not his thing. So he's okay. That sounds like a good plan to me. And so he does, and he turns his forces to the emperor's side, and the reformers are soundly defeated, and his cousin, the elector, who is kind of a stout guy and maybe not in fit fighting trim, is captured and sentenced to death. And Morris says, "Hey man, Emperor, we don't need to do that. Maybe just imprisonment is fine." And so that is why they don't execute the elector. But now Moritz is running the show. I mean, he's the most powerful man in Germany, and he's kind of holds all of these titles. And now with the Lutherans soundly defeated, the emperor can impose what is known as the I gotta get my interims right. I believe this is the Augsburg interim, and basically he's saying, well, look, the Council of Trent. You guys are familiar with the Council of Trent.
Mm-hmm.
This is when Roman Catholicism in its modern form is born, basically. This is a response to the Reformation, really. They say, all right, we got to clean house. We've got to set out, really, what it looks like to be Roman Catholic. We've kind of had this a little bit more organic and distributed model of canons and laws and customs, and we want to get it all under one house and one roof. They prophetically foresaw the Book of Concord and said, we got to do something like that. So the Council of Trent gets together, but these things take quite a bit of time, and so the idea of the interim was, well, here's how things are going to be until they've got everything sorted out, and then we're going to follow their lead there. There's the idea. Does not happen. But the interim kind of looks like this. The Lutheran lands must almost entirely revert to the pre-Reformation way of doing things. All the old feast days, all the power of the bishops, all these sorts of things, with really only a couple exceptions. A priest who had been married could keep their wives, good, and the laity was offered the cup, which had been taken away for a few hundred years. But that was kind of it, which falls far short of what the Reformation was after. And so you might imagine most of the reformers were pretty upset by this. But now the story circles back to our good friend Philip Melanchthon again. He is still in Wittenberg, which is kind of the seat of the elector's power, and the heart of the Reformation, we might say. And his mission is going to be trying to say, how do we kind of theologically deal with this? And so he takes a very conciliar view, and he says, well, most of these things are adiaphora, right? It doesn't really matter what kind of vestments you use, if we go back to the Roman vestments or if we kind of keep our stripped down ones. It doesn't really matter if you do feast days or not. It's fine to do them. It's no big deal. And he really tries to work things out. Is the theme for him, right? It's just the kind of guy he is. This is a good kind of guy to be in general, right? Not always as a theologian, but just in your daily life. And for the most part, this is something that the Reformers keep kind of wrestling with in their time. But there is one fellow, Matthias Flacius, who is not that kind of guy. And he says, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go back to any of this Roman stuff. And he flees to the city of Magdeburg, which was still a free city, and was still kind of doing all the Reformation stuff. They did not submit to the Augsburg Interim. They're kind of more northern Germany, and so even further from any imperial power. We'll see them again. And so he's up there, and he's really kind of strongly saying, all of these people that are going along with this are traitors, right? They've totally betrayed the Reformation's theology. And so he's very frustrated with these guys. Now we'll see problems with him as we get to the formula of Concord. He's kind of does a few things he stirs the pot a little bit, maybe more than is good for Christian unity. And so that's where our story takes us. This is kind of one of the last bastions of the Reformation, the city of Magdeburg. And the emperor leans on our old friend Moritz, right? The awful, evil betrayer. Well, there's kind of a good news about these backstabbing guys is sometimes they're willing to do it again. And so he says, Moritz, hey, those jerks in Magdeburg are still causing trouble. Let's stamp it out. Let's get things figured out. And so Moritz goes to besiege the city, and he does so for a couple years. But kind of on the side, he's secretly kind of negotiating with these folks. So he talks to them. He goes over and he talks to the French. You remember the French? These were a big thorn in Charles' side. And he says, hey, I kind of think France could maybe control a little bit more of the empire's land. That doesn't bother me. We could make that happen. That's not a big deal. And so all at once, he again turns coat and marches his army south against the emperor, totally takes him by surprise, very nearly captures the emperor in battle, which is not a good thing to happen, again, if you're an emperor. This is, again, seen as a career misstep. And really puts the empire on its back feet. He gets his poor cousin that got thrown in prison, you remember? He gets him out of prison, which is kind of him. And he returns a hero of the Reformation, right? He was imprisoned for the faith. And all of a sudden, the Reformation's back on. Morris has saved the day, the guy who ruined it in the first place. So kind of a forgotten... It's not right to call him... It is right to call him a hero. It's also right to call him a villain. He's both. He just does both.
Charles should have kept a better eye on him.
Yeah, Charles just was kind of not a good emperor.
Maybe it's the providence of God that Charles did
That's
not keep a
true.
better eye on.
That's what I was going to say. It's a God thing.
Seemed to be a hard guy to keep an eye on, looks like. So he kind of turns coat and really saves the day for the Reformation here. And all is a bit back in balance. There will be later problems, but for our 16th century purposes, that's where we're at. The reason I tell that whole story is you see that things were not kind of monolithic in the Lutheran community, in the whole Reformation community, right? Because you've got these other reformers, you've got Calvin, you've got Zwingli. Zwingli, pretty quickly they saw you're of a different ilk. But there were some of these Lutherans. You've got a guy named Martin Butzer, who is at various times dear friends of Luther, and other times really clashes with him. And eventually, in fact, when Germany gets overrun, he just leaves. He goes to England and gets out of there. And looking back, we know that John Calvin's not a Lutheran. Well, it wasn't so easy then, right? You didn't really know how everything was going to shake out, which is why people are a little bit more willing to be conciliar. But you've got all these kind of various groups, and you kind of will have two larger, more competing factions going into. I'll rope back around to small called articles and the tractate. You've got the Philippists, who are a little bit more conciliar, right? They kind of would really like if all those folks in Switzerland and France would also be Lutherans. I would like that too. And so they're a little bit more willing to work out, and they say, well, what language about the Lord's Supper would kind of work for you? Let's see if we can come to an agreement on this. And they do come to an agreement, and the other group of Lutherans say it's not a very good one. That's one that really kind of gives up on any Lutheran view here. There are some other issues, but that's kind of the biggest one. This group is called the Gnasio Lutherans. Kind of means true Lutherans. They go, we're the real guys. You guys are just crypto Calvinists, right? You guys have totally, and each side kind of has their own points that I would say they were right about, and other points that maybe they make too strongly. And so you've got these two big groups, and what it looks like is what the Roman Catholic Church accuses Protestants of today. They go, there are 5,000 Protestant denominations. None of you guys can work together. You don't know what you're doing. You're clearly, just making up your own thing, and every day there's a new Protestant denomination, and so this is proof that your theology is bad. Which is why the Book of Concord comes out to try to rope everyone back in. Now let's back up a little bit to the 1530s here, the 1537 small called articles and the tractate or the treatise on the power and the primacy of the Pope. The first, the small called articles, a fascinating little document. This is another sort of thing like the Augsburg Confession, a little less big and dramatic. There were a group of princes that were trying to work out, hey, who's with us in this faith and who is really doing a different thing. And so they asked Luther to draft up, hey, would you gather a confession for us? And he does, and these are the small called articles. Now they end up not using it for this meeting that they go off to, but many do subscribe to it. They say this is a really good confession of the Christian faith, and it comes to have some extra importance because as Luther is writing it, he comes down very sick. Again, a gout of kidney stones, I think. And so it's kind of seen as Luther's theological last will and testament. Now, he'll live for another decade or so, but this is kind of the deathbed confession of Luther, even though it doesn't turn out to actually be his deathbed. And it is a fine work, and we'll spend some time going through that. The other 1537 document, which kind of, I'm not sure historically how this comes to pass, usually gets appended to the small called articles, or it did as these things float around independently. Now they're all bound together, as you see. This treatise on the power and the primacy of the Pope. You notice as we went through the Augsburg Confession that there wasn't much said about the Pope himself. We had that thing on the power of the bishops, which was good, and a lot of those things will come up. Although, again, he's fairly conciliar with this, right? Did he say bishops can't also be princes? No. He just said that, the two are not connected, right? Still being very, guys, we can work this out. You just can't say that the Bible says this because it doesn't. That sort of thing. By the time he gets around to writing the treatise on the Pope, he is a little, again, he's a peaceful guy, but he is passionate about this stuff. It's his life's work. And so he's a little bit more fiery as he attacks the Pope's position a little bit more, in fact, quite a lot more directly, saying things like, of course, the Pope is not the ruler of the church by divine right. God didn't make him head over the church or something. He will, kind of depends which section you're reading, and sometimes say, but it's fine if we all want to decide that he's the head, that's fine. We just can't pretend that God decided that or something. At other times he'll say, nah, we're not doing that. Pope's awful. We've seen kind of what happens when you do this. We're not interested. He'll kind of work within and those are not contradictory positions, really, to say that this is allowable but inadvisable. But that's kind of where this work comes from. It kind of fills that hole that's not addressed yet in these official documents. Okay, we're making good, not good time, but good progress. So for the 40s and the 50s and 60s, many more things happen. They don't end up in the book of, well, they really do end up in the Book of Concord, in the formula. Now, the formula is addressing a very different thing. This is an internal debate. This is not addressed to the emperor in the least. But what's happened is I recounted all that history of how the Reformation is fractured and divided, and some are stronger on this, some use this language for that. They say, oh, we say this about free will, and they say, don't say that about free will. Some say, oh, we say this about good works, and they say, no. Case in point, there was a reformer that was going about saying good works are necessary for salvation. There was another who was saying good works are harmful to salvation. And the formula goes, all right, we got to sort this out. What is the right way to speak about good works? There were some preachers who were really kind of making hay with Christ's descent into hell. This is my favorite article on Christ's descent into hell. And really kind of making a big deal about it and speculating wildly. And I won't spoil the thunder for I will spoil the thunder. You'll forget by then. But it's a very short article, and it says, here's what the scriptures say. Don't say any more. We don't know any more than that. Deal with it. That's awesome. That's awesome. So the formula is each article kind of deals with a different controversy that had sprung up within the Lutherans. And the idea was, this comes from a couple guys, I forget the main guy's name. Chemnitz is the kind of main theologian behind it. There's a guy who's a little bit more of the face of the thing. Martin Chemnitz, probably my favorite theologian, just so fun to read. He's kind of a second generation Lutheran, perhaps the brightest of the Lutherans. The saying goes that if it were not for the second Martin, the first one would not have survived. That is to say, the Lutheran cause would have splintered and gone through the window. Just a brilliant theologian, basically invents the field of patristics, looking back at the church fathers, right? You read through this guy, and he's citing, like, Augustine says this here, Ignatius says this here, and you look at the footnotes, and he's getting the references wrong, which is extremely impressive, because that means he's not looking it up. This is just off the top of his head. And so he'll get the words right, and he just forgets where they are, because it's so ingrained in him. And so he's kind of the principal author of these. Again, not the only author. You see, there's a big problem that comes up between 1537 and 1577, and it's that Martin Luther dies. And this is kind of a big deal for the movement, because he was the face, and he was the head. And you would think it may not be that way, and that's just kind of simple for history, but it really was the case. Luther was quite a personality, and people kind of fell behind his cause, and he was the unity for a while, as people go, oh, Luther's really got it together. And it was a pretty brilliant man. And so at his death, things start to fall apart, and so Chemnitz's work was to bring them back together. Other big names, Cotreus, you may have heard of him. Who is, I think he's another man. I'll just have to look it up. Andreas, yes, this is the guy. Jacob André. He was another pretty formidable theologian and kind of a mover and a shaker in these circles. It's all about who you know in theology, yes. They say. And so these guys come together, and they're kind of saying, we need to save Lutheranism. We need to do it. We've got these controversies going around, and our church is fracturing. And so they sit down, and they really just do the hard work. And it's hard work, not of the theology, but of getting people to agree, right? And hammering these things out in a way that is faithful to the scriptures, faithful to the earlier reformers, and is pleasing to the maximum number of people, that we could stay united. And as a matter of fact, that same project is, of course, as we've said before, how the Book of Concord comes about at all. Right? Everyone goes, oh yeah, Augsburg Confession, that thing's great. We really like that. Oh yeah, Luther's Small Catechism, we use that in our church, right? But they hadn't kind of formally come together into a, this is what it means to be a Lutheran, which is really handy, right? Because I go sit in my new member class and I say, hey, we're not going to read through this whole thing, but if you want to know what it means to be a Lutheran, it's this. It's not that we sing certain songs, we do. It's not that we eat certain foods, we do. It's this. It's that we follow the doctrines contained here, and that's that. And if you don't like them, well, I'm sorry to hear that, but they are not subject to change. So you can change or you can leave, and that's okay. Which is really handy. I can't believe other church bodies haven't. Many have, in some ways, have a similar sort of thing, but none quite so formidable as the Book of Concord. So in 1580, they put out this Book of Concord and they send it around, and it's amazing that this works. Because there were a lot of other people that tried to do this kind of thing, but it was a little bit more haphazard. And so again, you've got like, oh man, how many Lutheran confessions are there? You know, because every city is going, well, here's what it means to be a Lutheran. Well, no, here's what it means to be a Lutheran. Well, no, it's these documents. Well, no, it's these documents. And so for whatever reason, and I think it's just the hard diplomatic work of doing church stuff. Chemnitz was also, he did things like, he's got his Enchiridion, which is a handbook, and it's basically, here's how to be a pastor. Like here's a catechism for pastors. If you've got this stuff, you're probably ready for it. If not, get it together, right? Because they continue to have these problems of guys who are not very well trained. And he's also putting together Kirchenordnung, which, yeah, you remember, church orders, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, here's a stock constitution and bylaws, and here's a service template that you can follow. Some of them, I think, even included some hymns. I mean, it's kind of a, you go to CPH and you order your church in a box. That's kind of what Chemnitz would put together for you. Because these churches were so all over the place. And so he's working to kind of bring some uniformity, or at least some regularity, we might say. So I think it's that kind of work that actually makes the Book of Concord stick. Also a careful selection of documents that everyone can agree to, right? If you don't agree to the Augsburg Confession, you're probably just not a Lutheran and we're not really interested in your vote, right? Okay, I've talked for 50 minutes straight. I'm sure you're glad my sermons don't sound like this. What do you guys have for me here? What do you hear that you've got questions about? Or
It's interesting to me that on one of these woodcuts here,
yeah.
One of the John Frederick, can't remember which one it was, but it talks about he was one of them, I think, that was willing to have his head cut off rather than deny what was in the confession, and willing to go to war rather than concede.
I think John Frederick usually refers to the younger. So he, in fact, does go to war. He's captured, and they decide to cut off his head, and then don't. But
and just recently, Prince Charles, whatever he's king, what is he, George now, whatever king he is.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of the titles of the monarch in England is Defender of the Faith. Well, that's recently changed by pressure from his advisors. He is now Defender of the Faith, plural, because Muslims are becoming so powerful in England. So
I heard
so
somewhere that most of the largest cities in England now have Muslim mayors.
a lot of them do.
yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, but that's the king now. Okay, change. I'm not just strictly Christian or Anglican anymore. Whatever. I defend all the faiths.
Which is a real shame for a
That's
German.
180 degrees.
A German king, right? We don't need to do monarchical politics here, but you guys remember that the monarchy of England is German, right? They got imported like 100. They're not that old, like 120 years ago, and after the First World War, changed their surname to be Windsor or something,
yeah.
Something that sounds a little more English. But they're from Germany.
Were they descendants of the George who provoked the American Revolution?
I don't know. No, I don't think so. I don't believe so.
No. I think
I'm not sure.
somebody came from Hanover, I believe, England.
Yes, that's it. They're the Hanovers, and believe it or not, World War I made that not so good looking a surname for public relations. So they did a little switcheroo there. All that to say, they should be Lutherans. They really need to confess the formula, and then we can get back on track here.
If you study English history, though, the English monarchy has roots in Germany, France, and all over. I guess kings intermarried with royalty from
Yeah.
other nations in those days, so
Most of the royalty in Europe is,
all the royalty of Europe were
Go
kind
back.
of
Related, yeah.
incestuously related
Yeah.
almost.
intermarriage and incest and all
All kinds of
all
good
the
stuff.
same ancestors.
Sort of like Solomon in the Old Testament, marrying princesses from various surrounding nations. And
Yeah, it turned out really well
the
for
way
him.
treaties were made that you would marry the daughter of your,
Political.
and so that's why polygamy was so common among kings.
Sure.
Not just because kings could get by with it.
Right. Actually, surprising there's not more of that stuff in the history of the Reformation, right? Because it was very much a political movement, at least one side of it. There's no way to tell I should say there's no way to tell the story without telling a political story as well. Okay, good. I hope you've all learned something.
Most of the history you gave us is in the introduction to the